I called it going pro, but I went pro in 1995. I remember the day that I kind of walked out of the office at Manchester University Student Union, where I used to be a student's advisor, a kind of like a professional advisor for students, and I'd been writing already for 4 or 5 years, and quite interestingly, my income from writing and my income from the job I was doing were pretty much the same. You've got to give it a go, haven't you? So I just kind of thought, okay, I'll give it a go. And then promptly in the next year earned absolutely nothing and had to live on a credit card and eat Lidl short spaghetti out of a tin and 17p bread from Lidl. But, you know, you have to go through that time so that you don't have to go through it anymore. And you learn kind of the ways of the self-employed person. Writing was calling me for a long time before I even really started writing. I'm one of those person that read so many books that there was nowhere else to go really. The words want to kind of come back out and find shapes again, and then the muses get on the side as well. And really, you know, one has to sound one's barbaric yawp. As an artist, I'm one of those people who it sounds like terrible name dropping, but I kind of some of my other influences are people like Jean Cocteau, who always considered himself a poet first, and then would write an opera or a ballet or a film or a play or a novel or whatever he felt like. But he always thought of himself as a poet, but he used the words writer as artist for himself. And it's not a kind of a mental construction. It's just that I always felt that if you can write something, it can be sort of brought to any of its kind of brother or sister arts somehow. Not that I'm always on the lookout as if it's kind of like an effort, but that one is kind of tuned into the world as an artist. You're kind of meeting the world in terms of kind of the spaces between things. I often say that my real job is to kind of get lost and fall in love, and between those two things I get to see what's going on, and I fall in love with things that you're not supposed to fall in love with, and I get lost in places where you're not supposed to go, and somehow those two things work together. And overhearing things is part of that. Being interested in people, observing people. Given the background that I initially came from, underclass basically is what you would say, I could have easily been written off. And yet my primary school teacher when I was about 8 years old noticed my love of books and kind of took me to the local library and introduced me to books. And so it's not that one goes into a situation like a prison or a care home or something trying to convince anybody, but if you meet people genuinely from the truth of you, no matter what background somebody is from, then something true in them will meet you. I feel this is more often the case than not. And people are often armoured and protecting themselves, especially in situations like that, so they may appear disinterested. But really, it's not words and things that we kind of push onto each other that really communicates. It's consciousness to consciousness, life to life communicates always. And there's something in poetry, there's something in literature, there's something in the truest art that finds its way through, even to somebody as uneducated as myself when I was a child. And my education has not been school. I had the benefit of a poor education, so that I wasn't conditioned in the way that many people were. My education came from books and just reading. And you know, if it's true for one person, then it must be true for others. And certainly I have found in prisons that people are really open a lot of the time. They want to tell their own stories first, but then as they do that, they start noticing things outside of themselves. And as we interact with things outside of themselves, or through images in a book or paintings and things like that, then the person kind of grows again. I work very often with the Royal Literary Fund. My couple of years at York St John's, I was a Royal Literary Fund Fellow. which is quite a complicated thing to explain. Basically, in a situation like that, you meet anybody who wants to communicate better through their writing. That can include staff and the students, and usually it's about the students' essays. You bring a writer's perspective rather than being a kind of a subject tutor. You bring a writer's perspective to helping people tell the story that they need to tell, because that's all an essay is. That's all a doctorate is a story. But we forget that in the trying to think academically. A lot of people think writing academically is kind of being very clever with words, but really it's telling a story very, very clearly about your chosen subject. I find that as I look back across my years of working with Alchemy, the poems that I consider to be my best pieces and the things that have gone furthest in the world have come out of that relationship. Where I live, the landscape is absolutely incredible. And I think it kind of soaks into things, but not in a way that's kind of obvious, kind of, it would be so easy living where I live to kind of follow a kind of Ted Hughes path or a Sylvia Plath path. And as much as I enjoy their work, what I do is very, very different. And yet the pastoral is definitely there. And with India, my travels to India, it's not that I try to write about India, but there's something very different there, in that there are pressures in England that, as a person of colour, a lot of people may not know about, and one feels this kind of sort of weight on your shoulders all of your life that you don't even realise is there, and you kind of just carry on with it. But when I go to India, and I usually go for sort of 2.5, 3 months at a time, that thing disappears, and I didn't really notice it until it had disappeared. It's quite a mysterious thing, and so there's a very different quality comes out there. But there I've been writing more non-fiction when I'm there, which is quite interesting, whereas when I'm in England I tend to stick with poetry. These days it's very hard to talk about spiritual things. We live in a world where, particularly in the West, we believe in acquisition of things as kind of progress, acquisition of knowledge. And in fact, I look at myself in the past, and, having the IQ that I have, having written books, things like that, those would kind of egoically reinforce me. But I've practiced meditation since I was 14 years old. I was a strange child, but I'd have these kind of moments of clarity as a kid. I used to call them little visions, where I could see that everything was connected together, and I tried expressing that in lots of different ways. I tried to find a home for this. So I tried to find through my mother's Catholicism, and then I moved to Buddhism, Zen, and so on. And in the end, sort of let go of all the labels, really, because God really doesn't have a religion. And as I've kind of let go into that, I found that there's a kind of awareness of peace inside myself, which is just there most of the time, even though the outside of the human life can get kind of sort of pulled in all sorts of directions. I find myself not reacting anymore, but responding, or there's a bit more space about things. And quite strange as this has kind of deepened, I noticed that people would come to me and sort of say, "Can I just ask you a question?" Or, we're getting married. This happened. We're getting married. Can you read your poem Every Atom out at our wedding? Actually, can you marry us? Or can you somebody's died. What do I do? My husband's been killed in a terrible accident. What do I do? What's my life about? And I'm like, why is this person talking to me? And then just as honestly as possible, just sit and give space to that person with what I call presence. And as that's kind of grown, I don't use the word teacher because I don't like the guru idea, quite honestly. I think that there's a lot of kind of egoism and strange stuff around all of that a lot of the time. But if through interacting with me in some way as a kind of guide, somebody finds some kind of peace, well, that peace was in them already. It's just that I've been a good mirror, perhaps, and for some people maybe I'm a reasonable mirror, and so I teach meditation now, and I run little retreats, and in terms of writing, I thought that the writing was over. I thought that I didn't need to kind of, because my first couple of books were sort of just saying, I'm here. After many years of having kind of no voice, it was just that, I'm here, I exist, I'm here. And then when those first two books got out of the way, I found that I was still interested in what language could do. And then I started turning my eye outwards towards other people, to falling in love and getting lost and seeing the spaces between things. And I can't see any difference between that and sitting and holding space for somebody and allowing them to be. And so when I write about people, and I like writing about people more than anything else, I try just to kind of meet who's really there, and as Hemingway would say, try to get out of the way enough so that when the reader reads the piece, they feel like they've actually met the person, that they've actually lived the experience, rather than they've been told something by somebody who calls themselves writer. And I think that the two things are exactly the same thing. Perhaps the writing is the outward expression of the spiritual practice.